When we talk about deploying and operating workloads in AWS, we're really talking about how applications are built, released, and maintained over time. AWS gives you multiple ways to provision and operate resources, from clicking buttons in the console to fully automated pipelines using infrastructure as code and DevOps practices. For the AWS exam, it's important to understand when and why you would choose each approach. Modern cloud environments prioritize automation, repeatability, and reliability, and AWS is designed around those principles. Let's start with the cloud deployment models. This describes where your workloads run and how they interact with infrastructure. 1. Public cloud. In the public cloud model, all applications and data run on AWS managed infrastructure, shared securely with other customers. Key characteristics: highly scalable and elastic, pay-as-you-go pricing, no responsibility for physical hardware, fast to deploy and innovate. Example: a startup hosting a web application on Amazon EC2, using Amazon S3 and Amazon RDS, all fully hosted in AWS. Exam tip: if the question mentions low operational overhead, scalability, or cost efficiency, the answer is usually public cloud. 2. Private cloud. A private cloud is a cloud environment dedicated to one organization only. It may be on-premises, hosted by a third party, built for strict compliance or regulatory needs. Key characteristics: full control over infrastructure, higher cost and management overhead, often required for legacy or regulated workloads. Example: a financial institution running workloads in a private data center due to regulatory requirements. Exam tip: AWS is not a private cloud by default. If you see dedicated hardware on premises, that points to private cloud, not AWS public services. 3. Hybrid cloud. A hybrid cloud combines on-premises infrastructure with AWS cloud services. AWS integrates with on-prem environments using site-to-site VPN, AWS Direct Connect. Why organizations use hybrid cloud? Gradual migration to AWS, keeping legacy systems on-prem. Data residency or latency requirements. Example: a company runs its core database on-prem but uses AWS for analytics and disaster recovery. Exam tip: if the question mentions on-prem plus AWS plus VPN or Direct Connect, the answer is hybrid cloud. 4. Multi-cloud. A multi-cloud strategy uses more than one cloud provider, such as AWS plus Azure plus Google Cloud. Why companies choose multi-cloud? Avoid vendor lock-in. Use best services from each provider. Meet regional or regulatory requirements. Example: an organization uses AWS for compute, Azure for identity integration, and GCP for analytics. Exam tip: multi-cloud is about multiple providers, while hybrid cloud is about on-prem plus cloud. Don't confuse the two. Deployment strategies in AWS. Now let's talk about how applications are deployed and updated. AWS supports multiple deployment strategies to balance speed, risk, and availability. In-place deployment. With in-place deployment, the new version replaces the old one directly on existing instances. Characteristics: simple and fast, causes brief downtime, higher risk if rollback is needed. AWS service example: AWS Code Deploy automates in-place deployments. Exam tip: if downtime is acceptable and simplicity is prioritized in-place deployment. 2. Blue/green deployment. In blue/green deployment, two environments exist. Blue current production, green new version. Traffic switches to green only after validation. Benefits: near zero downtime, easy rollback, safer production releases. Example: deploy a new version behind an application load balancer, then shift traffic after testing. Exam tip: if the question mentions zero downtime, instant rollback, or two environments, think blue/green. 3. Canary deployment. With canary deployment, only a small portion of users or servers receives the new version first. Benefits: early detection of issues, reduced blast radius, gradual confidence building. Example: 5% of users see the new version. If metrics are good, expand to 100%. Exam tip: if the question mentions testing with a small user subset, the answer is canary deployment. 4. Linear deployment. Linear deployment shifts traffic gradually in fixed increments over time. Benefits: predictable rollout, controlled risk, no sudden traffic spikes. Example: increase traffic by 10% every 10 minutes until fully deployed. Exam tip: if traffic shifts evenly over time, that's linear deployment, not canary. Operating model in AWS. Big picture: modern AWS operations are built around automation, infrastructure as code, IAC, C/CD pipelines, DevOps practices. AWS services commonly used: AWS Cloud Formation, AWS Code Pipeline, AWS Code Build, AWS Code Deploy. These practices ensure deployments are repeatable, secure, auditable, scalable. Key takeaways for AWS exams: know the difference between deployment models: public, private, hybrid, multi-cloud. Understand why each deployment strategy exists. Focus on trade-offs: speed versus risk versus downtime. AWS favors automation and IAC. Manual steps don't scale. Provisioning methods in AWS. When we talk about provisioning in AWS, we mean creating, configuring, and preparing cloud resources so an application can run. This includes things like servers, databases, storage, networking, and permissions. AWS gives you multiple ways to provision resources, and choosing the right method depends on scale, automation needs, team maturity, and environment type. For the exam, it's important to understand what each method is best suited for. Let's go through them from most manual to most automated. 1. AWS Management Console. The AWS Management Console is the web-based interface you access through a browser. This is the most visual and beginner-friendly way to provision resources. You click through forms to create EC2 instances, S3 buckets, IAM users, and more. When it's commonly used: learning AWS for the first time, exploring new services, one-off or ad hoc tasks, troubleshooting or checking configurations. Example: you manually launch an EC2 instance, choose an AMI, select an instance type, configure networking, and click Launch. Important exam tip: the console is manual and not ideal for repeatable deployments. If you see words like clicking, browser, or manual setup, the console is usually the right answer. 2. AWS Command Line Interface, CLI. The AWS CLI allows you to manage AWS services using commands from a terminal or script. Instead of clicking, you type commands. His makes provisioning faster, scriptable, and repeatable compared to the console. When it's commonly used: Automating tasks with scripts. Managing multiple environments. Dev, test, prod. Bulk operations, creating many resources. C/CD pipelines. Example. A script that creates EC2 instances, tags them, and attaches IAM roles automatically. Exam tip. If the question mentions automation, scripting, or repeatable commands, think AWS CLI. 3. AWS Software Development Kits, SDKs. AWS SDKs allow developers to provision and manage resources using programming languages like Python, Java, JavaScript, or Go. This is provisioning inside application code, not from the console or terminal. When it's commonly used. Custom automation logic. Applications that create resources dynamically. Integrations with other systems. Example. A Python application using Boto 3 that creates an S3 bucket when a new customer signs up. Key distinction for exams. CLI, scripting from the command line. SDKs, provisioning from inside application code. 4. AWS Cloud Formation, infrastructure as code. AWS Cloud Formation is a core concept for the exam. It lets you define your entire infrastructure in templates, YAML or JSON called infrastructure as code, IAC. Instead of creating resources manually, you describe what you want, and AWS builds it for you. Why this is powerful. Fully automated, version controlled, repeatable and consistent, easy rollback and updates, works across regions and accounts. Example. A CloudFormation template that defines EC2 instances, load balancers, security groups, IAM roles, all created together as a stack. Exam tip, very important. If you see phrases like repeatable deployments, consistent environments, infrastructure as code, version-controlled infrastructure, the answer is almost always AWS Cloud Formation. 5. AWS Elastic Beanstalk, AWS. Elastic Beanstalk is a platform as a service, PaaS-style offering. You upload your application code, and Beanstalk automatically provisions EC2, configures load balancers, sets up scaling, handles monitoring and health checks. You focus on code, not infrastructure. When it's commonly used, web applications, developers who don't want to manage servers, fast deployments with minimal AWS knowledge. Example. You upload a Java or Node.js app. An Elastic Beanstalk deploys it on EC2 with auto-scaling and an application load balancer. Key exam distinction. Cloud Formation. You define infrastructure. Elastic Beanstalk. AWS manages infrastructure for you. If the question says, developers want to focus on code and not infrastructure, choose Elastic Beanstalk. You are often tested on matching the right tool to the scenario. Manual setup or learning, think AWS Management Console. Scripting and automation, think AWS CLI. Application-level automation, think AWS DKs. Repeatable infrastructure, think AWS Cloud Formation. Code-focused deployments, think AWS Elastic Beanstalk. Final takeaway. AWS gives you multiple provisioning paths, but modern cloud operations strongly favor automation, infrastructure as code, and repeatability. For the exam, remember, cloud formation and automation are the preferred AWS best practices. Methods of operating in the AWS cloud. Once your resources are provisioned in AWS, the work doesn't stop there. Operating in the AWS cloud means continuously monitoring, optimizing, securing, and maintaining those resources so applications remain reliable, secure, and cost-effective. AWS provides a rich set of tools that help teams operate at scale, with visibility, automation, and governance built in from day one. Let's break this down into 3 key areas: monitoring and observability, automation and management, and governance and security. First, monitoring and observability. Operating effectively starts with visibility. You need to know what's happening in your environment at all times. Amazon Cloud Watch. It is the primary monitoring service in AWS. It collects metrics, CPU usage, memory, latency, request counts, logs, application logs, system logs, events, state changes, operational events. With CloudWatch, you can create dashboards to visualize performance, set alarms that trigger actions automatically, detect issues before users are impacted. Example: if CPU usage on an EC2 instance exceeds 80%, CloudWatch can trigger an alarm and even initiate auto-scaling. Exam tip: if the question mentions metrics, logs, alarms, or monitoring performance, the answer is Amazon Cloud Watch, AWS Cloud Trail. While CloudWatch focuses on performance, AWS Cloud Trail focuses on activity. Cloud Trail records all API calls: who performed an action, what action was taken, when and from where it happened. This creates an audit trail, which is critical for security investigations, compliance, governance. Example: if a security group is modified to allow public access, CloudTrail shows exactly who made that change. Exam tip: CloudTrail answers the question, who did what in this AWS account? Second, automation and management. Modern cloud operations rely heavily on automation to reduce manual effort and human error. AWS Auto-Scaling. AWS Auto-Scaling automatically adjusts resource capacity based on demand. It supports services like Amazon EC2, DynamoDB, Amazon ECS. This ensures applications maintain performance, costs are optimized, over-provisioning is avoided. Example: an e-commerce website scales up during peak shopping hours and scales down at night. Exam tip: if the question mentions automatically adjusting capacity, think AWS Auto-Scaling. AWS Systems Manager, SSM. AWS Systems Manager is a centralized operations hub. It allows teams to run commands on multiple instances, automate operational tasks, patch operating systems, track configurations, maintain inventory of resources. All of this can be done without logging directly into servers. Example: you can patch hundreds of EC2 instances across regions with a single automation workflow. Exam tip: Systems Manager is about operational control and automation at scale. AWS organizations. As environments grow, companies often use multiple AWS accounts. AWS organizations helps manage them centrally by applying service control policies, SCPs, enforcing governance guardrails, managing consolidated billing, structuring accounts hierarchically. Example: a company separates development, testing, and production into different AWS accounts, but governs them centrally. Exam tip: if the question mentions multiple AWS accounts with centralized control, the answer is AWS organizations. Thread, governance and security. Operating in AWS also means ensuring environments remain secure and compliant over time. AWS Config. AWS Config continuously evaluates resource configurations. It helps you track configuration changes, identify non-compliant resources, enforce internal and regulatory standards. Example: if an S3 bucket is created without encryption, AWS Config can immediately flag it as non-compliant. Exam tip: config answers. Is this resource configured correctly? AWS Trusted Advisor. AWS Trusted Advisor provides real-time best practice recommendations. It checks your account across security, cost optimization, performance, fault tolerance, service limits. Example: Trusted Advisor might warn you about open security group ports or underutilized resources. Exam tip: Trusted Advisor is about recommendations, not enforcement or threat detection. AWS Artifact. Finally, AWS Artifact supports compliance and audits. It's a centralized portal where you can download compliance reports, soak PC ISO, access security certifications, retrieve agreements like HIPAA, BC Kyle. Example: during an audit, a company downloads official AWS compliance reports from AWS Artifact. Exam tip: if the question mentions compliance reports or audit documentation, the answer is AWS Artifact. Key takeaway for AWS exam: operating in AWS is about observability. Think about CloudWatch, CloudTrail. Automation. Think about auto-scaling, systems manager governance. Think about organizations, config best practices and compliance. Think about Trusted Advisor, Artifact. AWS operations are designed to be automated, scalable, and auditable. And the exam tests whether you understand which tool solves which operational problem.
Thank you for watching. See you in the next class.